Welcome in to the latest edition of the Autzen Audibles Podcast. I'm Matt Preem, Eric Scopel, Jared Mack on the show. It's your Monday edition of the podcast, or it could be your Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, whenever you listen to it. But we're recording this on June 6th, Mailbag edition. We've got a wide variety of topics here, Eric. And one specifically for Jared as well, which is a good sign. His great coverage on baseball work is starting to pay through with more and more discussion on it.
Yeah, how about that, Jared? You put a lot of effort into a thing, and people appreciate it. That has to feel good. I wish the team would have given you another weekend to write about them, though. Unfortunately, we'll get to that later, though. But yeah, no, we're starting with some football talk. We'll get to baseball. We've got a little men's basketball to end the show. I think pretty good variety of stuff. This is the middle of, again, the off season, and so there's a lot to discuss here. And we're going to start here with kind of like a house cleaning item, which actually I thought was just good to address from @NatFod. Roughly how many players should we expect to lose to graduation / the NFL at the end of the season? I can't keep track of whose eligibility after this year runs out and who will not be eligible. Who will be eligible for the draft that might take that leap. #Autzen Audibles. The COVID thing, the COVID year in 2020 continues to make this really complicated. I will note we're going to run through some of this. Matt also has a scholarship chart up on duckcharacter.com. It's pinned on the message board. I think it's a really good resource to kind of go through, and it has by class, there's 11 seniors, there's so and so many juniors, and runs all the way through it. That'll help kind of communicate some of this. But the COVID year thing has made this a lot more complicated, and I know we're a couple of years removed from that season, but there's still kind of the lingering ramifications, I guess, if you will. And I kind of prepared a little of this, and we can run through some of maybe the likelihoods of who actually could go pro. But 11 seniors on the roster that don't have eligibility after this year. So that's kind of your baseline. And then there are a bunch of draft eligible juniors and sophomores, and even technically Justin Flo is like a redshirt freshman, I think, and he's also in this category. But like I wrote down 6 guys that I think are the most likely to potentially enter the draft. I think that would be like, I don't know, maybe Bo Nix, just because he talked about, I think, kind of wanting to conclude his career soon. I don't know what his draft stock looks like. Maybe it improves, maybe it doesn't, maybe he comes back. I think Stephen Jones and Brandon Dorlitz are guys that discussed going pro this previous year. It seems likely that they'll take a look again. Noah Sewell, I think, is the highest. I think he's gone after this year. I'd be stunned if he came back, barring, I don't know. I don't even want to put it out there what it might be, because it'd probably be something not positive about this season. And then Justin Flo, and I wrote down Christian Gonzalez because there's quite a bit of hype about the way he performed in the spring. So those are like the 6 most likely guys. And then there's a handful of other guys that are fifth-year juniors. Like I wrote down Isaiah Crocker, Spencer Webb, Sam Taimani, Steve Stevens, and Brian Addison are all fifth-year juniors. So they also get kind of thrown in the mix here. So a very inexact number, but I think like hypothetically 16 to 20 probably.
Draft eligible?
Well, no, that just including the 11 seniors.
Oh, okay.
11 seniors is your baseline, and then I said probably maybe 5 to 7 of these guys that are draft eligible that could maybe do it. But that probably, I don't even know if that, I don't know. It's hard. This is really hard to do right now.
The draft eligible thing is like, if you just strictly draft eligible, it's over 30 guys.
Yeah, it's like the whole team.
It's it's massive. And to the question, we even still get confused about what year guys are, what eligibility these guys are, because it's hard to track. And so don't think you're alone in that. I mean, we get paid to know this, and while we know most of it off the top of our heads, there are guys that you have to sit there and think, like Steve Stevens, for whatever reason, will always, for my eyes, be younger than Javon Holland, yet they came in at the same time, and Holland is entering his second year in the NFL and could, and Stevens could have 2 more years before he makes it to the NFL if he really wanted to. But I think your number is right around there, Eric. I do wonder, like, what does Flo do if he stays healthy this whole season and has a huge year? He's got to go pro, because in my eyes, don't risk another injury by coming back and hurting your stock. Strike while the iron's hot. And that's where things could get interesting. Like, what does a Bridges do if he has a really huge year at safety for Oregon this season? What does a guy like Braden Swinson do if he has a really big season? Sean Dollars, if he has a really big year, does he go pro? There's that this number could grow to a really big number if certain guys have really big seasons.
Yeah, of course. I mean, when you look at the who could actually leave, it's like in that 30 number that you mentioned, Matt. I'll throw a twist into this just because we haven't mentioned it yet. There are perks of staying in college now, more than just getting your education and your degree, which helps you in life. You can get paid basically to stay in college. So for those players who are those fifth-year juniors or fourth-year sophomores or Justin Flo's third year of a freshman, you could still stay. There's no obvious reason just to leave so that you can go get financial compensation, which I think will help out Oregon in the long run. But I think that number is closer to something like Eric said, where it's like that 20 range. A lot of it is just borrowing off of how good players are this season. Losing 11 off the bat is already it's a pretty good number right there. Then you have players who just, they're just not going to want to stay in school for 6 years, whatever the case may be. Maybe that is someone like Steve Stevens, who does have a year or two more of eligibility, or Spencer Webb, or maybe they play well and suddenly have a draft prospectus. I'd expect to see players like Dorless and Sam Taimani gone. Justin Flo would probably be gone, I think, maybe no matter what. Even if he has a bad season or a bad year and is healthy for 8 games, I still think he's probably gone, just because the NFL will probably take a shot at him. I think there's a lot of players who could just end up leaving, which is, I guess, a good and a bad thing, because a good thing for Lanning to have his full hands on a class and get as many as the NCAA allows, because we're still not sure whether or not they're going to lift that restriction. So 29 new guys in the class of 2023 or 2024, whatever the case is. It'll be young, that's for sure, but I think it's also another positive development on how many players have come through Oregon and you could see as having some type of NFL potential. Whether or not that's first round picks, whatever the case may be, I think there's a solid 10 or 11 names that you could see being potentially drafted, unlike this past season where it was really 2 or 3 and only one of them got drafted.
Yeah, and the other thing, if you're trying to think about reverse engineering this for the 85 for 2023, the portal makes that even, I think, easier to kind of accommodate, because you can assume, like I think it's a good point Jared brought up of the financial compensation that might keep a Spencer Webb or an Isaiah Crocker or a Brian Addison around a little longer, just because they've got incentive to be here, even though they're probably going to be graduate students at that point. They're working on, their postgraduate degrees. That plays a role. But there's also the part here where, with the number of, let's say, for example, they want to take like 25 or 26, like Jared is saying, and really replenish in 2023. They can easily, even if it's not a very large number, say it's on I guess the lesser end, it's only 16 players that leave. They can very easily get under that with a handful of guys transferring or 2 handfuls of guys transferring, like we just saw this offseason, where even, going through the spring, a couple of guys leave, a couple of guys go after the spring. The free agency almost of this makes the kind of getting under 85 part a lot less complicated than it did a couple of years ago. So it's really unpredictable, which I'm sure makes it really fun for a college football staff to try to put this all together, because it is a constant, I don't know, everything's in motion at all times, and you really don't know. I'm sure they have somewhere, I don't know who it is, Marshall Malkow or somebody has a board of like, okay, here's like almost like what is it, Charlie from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, with all the little lines going everywhere. Of like, okay, well, it could be, here's how he could get to 85, but this might happen and this might happen. So it's never been more complicated, and it will help once we get to 2023 and the COVID kind of years are no longer around. That'll kind of, everything will get back to some level of normalcy. But with the portal in place, it's always going to be a little bit more complicated and hard to predict.
Wait, quick Q, who's your guys' favorite like COVID year strange like class alignment? Like how Sean Dollars is like a 4th-year sophomore.
That might be my pick.
Yeah,
I think it's mine. Yeah, it's hilarious.
I think Sean Dollars is my pick, but since you guys both picked him, I'm gonna go with Justin Flo being a true freshman still, technically. Even though Noah Sewell is going to be a junior, they came in at the same time, and the expectation for Flo is just off the charts, and he could win Freshman of the Year in the Pac-12 this season. Like that's a very realistic outcome in the season, which just doesn't make any sense. And like Sewell was a freshman all-conference player 2 years in a row too. Like that's just goofy to me as well.
Yeah, two linebackers from the same class could be. Sewell was the All Pac-12 Freshman of the Year in 2020, and Flo, who was in the same recruiting class, could win the same award in 2022. That doesn't seem like it makes any sense, but where it's at.
And they're both, and the fact that they're both the two highest rated players at that position to ever sign with Oregon. Like, you would think like with Flo's story is, oh, he's probably a gray shirt, enrolled early, had to red shirt, had to buy his time, and then just kind of like exploded onto the scene. No, like he's like literally like one of the best recruits ever to sign with Oregon football.
I think another one for me is Isaiah Crocker, just because I mean, it's another weird thing where he came with expectations. We haven't really seen him much. We saw him at the tail end of last year, and you kind of feel like, oh man, maybe this is his final goodbye. Like, this is kind of the end of his career. It's finally lights coming on, and you're like, oh, he has 2 more years. So I mean, like light could really come on for him at some point here. Just a couple of those are so weird. Like even Brian Addison's another one where it's like, oh man, maybe he can win the safety job in his last season. No, actually, he could be the team starting like deep safety for 2 straight seasons. This COVID stuff is makes it wonky. Okay. Last football question on the show here from @JoeyBonin33. Assuming that Bo Nix is named the starter this fall, could he have a career best season with Oregon? #Autzen Audibles. Are we talking statistically career best season? I assume that's kind of what the expectation, right, is.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I mean, like you go through his stats at Auburn, I think it's somewhat plausible. I mean, he had his career best season was his freshman year, threw for 2,542 yards, 16 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. I mean, yeah, I think if
that's easily attainable.
That doesn't feel that far off at all. In fact, I remember when we were doing, you guys set the line at 3,000 or something for the passing yards a while ago.
I think it was a little less than that.
No, I think you guys did it for 3,000 because I picked the under, and then afterwards I was like, I was really stupid. I should have picked the over because I think he probably will. If he's a starting quarterback and they play 13 games, 14 games maybe, like they'll hit that. So I think it's pretty likely he hits those stats, to be totally honest.
I mean, if he just replicates what Anthony Brown did last year at Oregon, it's a career year because Brown threw for 2,989 yards, 18 touchdowns. That's more yards by far than he did in 2019. That's 2 more touchdowns than he threw in 2019. Even Brown's 7 interceptions is equal to the high that Bo Nix had in 2020. So I think it's a real possibility that Bo Nix has a career year at Oregon in his 4th season of college football. I'd be curious to flip this question. Bo Nix's career high is 388 yards rushing and 7 touchdowns, which came on 108 carries in 2020. Does he top that? I don't know there.
That's a good question. I don't think so. 388 yards. I just don't know how much Oregon is going to run with the quarterback. I'm not saying it's going to be like how it's been the last couple of years where there is no running quarterback, but I just don't think Bo Nix is as physical as Anthony Brown was last year, and could get you like that 4 or 5 yards a carry. That's why his average attempt, as Matt just said, was 3.3 or whatever it is, 3.2. I think he's just going to throw it more. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I think he's a better passer than Anthony Brown is. And like Matt was saying, all he has to do is be a better Anthony Brown to set career marks in almost every statistical category. And I think he's already a better quarterback than Anthony Brown was. So with better weapons, more likely than not, a better offense oriented around throwing the ball down the field, which will net you more passing yards and fewer attempts. I think if Bo Nix is named the starter this fall, which I think we're all in agreement on that he's the frontline guy to do it and probably will be, I I think, as long as they play those 12 to 13 to 14 games, I think he's got a really good shot at setting career highs in almost every category, except maybe not for rushing.
The other part is it's just hard to know in the rushing, and even I guess we have to take it into account for the passing, just what this offense looks like exactly. We haven't seen it in the game setting. I mean, the spring game was really encouraging. They threw the ball down the field a lot, which is probably why we're really optimistic. But we also have to realize the spring game, their quarterbacks are in red jerseys. They can't be touched. So there was no run game. So it's like really hard to know. Like, I know Bo is, you run through that. That's a fairly impressive rushing season. It's like 400 yards and 7 touchdowns. That shows he can run a little bit. I know he's dealt with some injuries since then. Maybe he's a step slow, but like it's possible if they want to incorporate a quarterback running. I don't think we talk about Anthony Brown as some sort of a barometer. I don't think he's going to run for 660 yards and 9 touchdowns like Brown did last year. Because that was actually, I think, you go back to the all-time Oregon quarterback rushing leaderboards, one of the stronger rushing seasons for a quarterback. I don't expect Nix to do that. But if the running quarterback is a big component of the offense, or bigger than maybe we expect, he could maybe hit 300, 400 yards rushing. That's possible. Doesn't seem like it's crazy to me, but it's hard to know right now because we just haven't seen this offense in full motion yet. All right.
I just think it's going to happen. Like, I have a hard time seeing Bo Nix with the weapons that he has, and maybe most importantly, the best offensive line he will have played for in his career, where he doesn't throw for 2,300 yards or more. I just have a really hard, or 2,500 yards, excuse me. So a really hard time seeing that. That would mean something happened where injury, or he just got the worst case of the yips ever, and something drastically happened where he doesn't hit 2,600 yards. Like, that's just, think about how just average Oregon's passing game was last season with Anthony Brown, and yet it was better than anything Nix had done previously. And like Jared said, I think he's a better quarterback than Anthony Brown. It's just been the lack of offense at Auburn to prevent him from doing that. So, all right, let's take. Do you have anything else to add to that, or do we want to take a quick break?
Let's hit the break.
All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, you're listening to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Thank you for getting through that. 2 questions down, 2 more to go.
Jared, this is where we turn the show over to some baseball talk. From @NashDuccaneer, Jared, what was your favorite thing about covering the baseball team this season, and do you expect them to be better next season? #Autzen Audibles. Oregon, of course, eliminated on Sunday by Louisville. I don't know how much recap you want to do on this past season, but what was your favorite part, and kind of set a little bit of an expectation for what the 2022 season, or 23 season, could be?
Sure thing. Nash, thank you for asking. I'd say the best part about covering baseball this year was just going to the field almost every day and watching baseball. The sights and sounds, there's just nothing like it for me. I'd get there probably too early and just watch both teams take batting practice, talk to players, talk to coaches, talk to scouts, do all that good stuff. I just loved every second of it. And traveling down to Scottsdale was fun as well. A bit too hot, but that's just the native New Englander in me. As far as what it takes to be for next season, it's a tough question to answer right now because there's a lot of draft eligible guys on this Oregon team that do have eligibility left, who are juniors, draft eligible juniors, like Anthony Hall or Josh Kasevich. I think those players, if they come back, that this team becomes a real contender. But if I'm Anthony Hall, if I'm Josh Kasevich, I'm probably going to be drafted in, the first 6 rounds. I'm probably leaving school. And that's what they should be doing. So those are big shoes to fill. And obviously last year you lose Jovan Matthews and Zavala, and you look at those as big shoes to fill. Oregon filled them this past season with a better offense. So maybe they fill them again next year. Who knows? They're the 26th ranked recruiting class coming in, according to Perfect Game, which is like the kind of standard, the baseline for baseball recruiting. I think the key to them being better, and I think anybody who's listening who has watched the team this year, or at least read what I've been putting out there, understands that pitching needs to get better. I think they hit the transfer portal really hard for pitching. Adam Meyer, their number one, was hurt early in the year with a season-ending elbow injury. He technically still could be drafted. I don't anticipate it, but that's still up in the air. But then you have R.J. Gordon and Isaac Aon, Jay Stoffel, guys who 8 innings but weren't necessarily fantastic. They need more guys who could become frontline starters, who could be a number 2 or a number 3. I think if you get more lefties in the bullpen and 2 more starters on this team through the portal, or maybe a freshman emerges as one of those guys, I think they could be better than they were this year. It just depends at this point who gets drafted and who stays in school. I think that's the biggest part of that question.
Isn't, regardless of what happens from a roster standpoint, Jared, like, I obviously did not pay full attention to Oregon baseball, but I watched at least parts of games every week. I watched, when I was able to, the games this weekend from my sleeping, but it felt like their pitching was just off. Like it didn't feel like they had the usual number of lefty to righty combos, and that almost feels like, regardless of who comes and who stays or who leaves, like, they need to revamp the bullpen. They need to revamp their arm race.
Yeah, I mean, what you saw this weekend was an encapsulation of what Oregon's pitching has been this entire season. There's only 2 lefties in the bullpen, so that's not that good. Colby Summers has no more eligibility. He's the old man of the group. They call him Pops for a reason. So they'll have to bring in more lefties. They'll have to somehow promote somebody within their bullpen into that closer role as an established guy. I'm not sure who that would be. Maybe Rio Britton, but he didn't perform that well on Sunday. The arms just need to be revamped. I mean, another thing is that, probably 70% of the innings are going to sophomores, and Gordon, Aon, Jay Stoffel, Logan Mercado, Rio Britton, some of their better arms are all sophomores. And another year of baseball this past season will probably help them going into the offseason. Jake Angier is a tremendous pitching coach. I know Coach Mark Wasikowski is going to hit the recruiting trail hard. That's what he's been doing since he's got here. I think players in the transfer portal will want to come to Oregon just after what they've seen the past couple of years under Wasikowski, how it's a fun baseball system. They hit hard, they throw hard. I think they can be better than they were this year, but I think it's just going to depend, again, on who stays and what arms they get in the portal and what arms further develop in their system.
All right, we're going to wrap this up with a question here. It's kind of presidential because the question asker is John V. Adams, and the question is basketball. This is headed your way, men's basketball, Matt. With Kel'el Ware coming in as a Team USA 18 selection, how rare is that for Oregon, and when was the last time Oregon had one? And he asks, has Oregon ever had a comparable player? And then finally, any word on how Ethan Butler's ability and how his development is going? Thank you, gentlemen. # Autzen Audibles. This is going to be, I guess I kind of like am giving you guys the whole second half of the show here because I don't have a whole lot of input. I like Kel'el Ware. I think he could be a big-time draft pick, a big-time player. But I don't know. What's the history like with the Team USA 18 stuff? Do you have that in front of you?
There's not a lot there. Lewis King was a member of the Team USA. Troy Brown was a member of the Team USA. Peyton Pritchard had an invite and was part of the tryout, but never made it to the final roster. So there is some history, but it's not a lot. Lewis King is the most notable one to get to. I think he was part of a championship team with that one, but they've certainly tried for a lot of guys that have been on Team USA. I know Oregon staff was able, even at one point, to go long time ago when RJ Barrett was in high school and watched him, play for Team Canada. at an event where Team USA was playing at. So they've gone after some of these elite high caliber guys. They just don't have a lot of them in there. I think Ware probably has the best possible outcome to have maybe the best air quote career for Team USA in competition, just because I don't know if Luke King was a full-time starter for them. He maybe started a couple games, but Ware looks like a guy that's going to play a lot, just because he's one of the only big guys on the team, and it's going to be look. Anytime you get more experience playing against elite competition, which will be playing with your teammates and also the world's best at your age group, is a good thing. And yeah, it might prevent a little bit of delay for his development at Oregon, his arrival at Oregon. I think the trade-off is worth it for Oregon if you're looking at it from their perspective. So it's not very often. Now, Butler's ability or development sounds like he's improved, sounds like he's growing. I don't think it's a case where you should be out here thinking that Ethan Butler is going to be a starter in 2022, 2023, but it wouldn't surprise me if if he's maybe in that rotation at some point early in the season as Dana Altman is figuring out who can do what and what rotations work. It wouldn't surprise me if he's one of those last few guys to get called off the bench early on in the season as he's figuring things out. And from there, you just don't know. But he is certainly a big kid. I mean, you look at his frame and he's like 6'7" and 210 pounds or so. He's got the physical tools to turn into something pretty special. It's just now, can Oregon's coaching staff and more importantly, Ethan Butler kind of refine that clay mold and turn it into something pretty special there.
Matt, we're going to go off show notes here because while you were under the weather with your sickness, a couple guys
COVID.
Came back.
We can just say that.
Okay, I try to be careful because we have to establish if we could. Okay, so Matt had COVID a little last week, so that's why he wasn't on the last show and whatnot. And I was just with Will Richardson back and Quincy Guerrier coming back. We kind of know now. Finally, it's crazy because it's like early June. We now know what the roster will look like. Like, how do your expectations change? I guess with Will coming back and Quincy coming back.
Well, I mean, most importantly, this does not force a Dior Johnson into the starting lineup. I think that is pivotal, and that's not to say I don't think Dior could be a guy that starts. It doesn't require him to be that guy, and that's always my biggest distinction for freshmen of Dior's status or Ware's status is you want them to be in the starting lineup because they're that good, not because you need them to be that good. Like Troy Brown had to be in the starting lineup for Oregon. And while he had a solid freshman year at Oregon, I don't necessarily think he was even their third or fourth best player on the team. He certainly was at times their best player, but he was too widely inconsistent. And this kind of protects you now from the inconsistencies you see sometimes with freshmen. And so I think the expectation is you've got Will in the starting lineup. You've got probably Keyshawn Barthélemy in the starting lineup. Keysnard is probably in the starting lineup. The transfer from South Carolina. Quincy and Dante, you've now got a rotation of 5 guys that either are multi-year starters at Oregon or multi-year starters for teams in the Power 5 or I guess Power 6 of college basketball, which is a good sign. And now your bench is made up of guys like Biddle, Ware, Dior. You've got Tyrone Williams, the nation's junior college leader in scoring. Rivaldo Soares. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say that the expectation is that they win the Pac-12 conference, but the expectation should be that they're in that discussion. Like, they need to contend for it. Doesn't necessarily mean win it, but I would be pretty disappointed that if this team does not have a chance to win the league in the final month of the season or final 3 weeks of the season.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like a team that there's I know this is worst case, but they just had to come off a season where they didn't make the NCAA tournament. I feel like there's no excuses for that this year.
They're a tournament team, hands down.
Right? Has to be.
Yeah, like they have to be a tournament team. If they're not a tournament team for a second year in a row under Altman, major disappointment. You'd really have to go back and look at what went wrong. Why did this happen for a second time? Because last year's team was a tournament team. They just didn't make it. They just never clicked. Kind of getting a do-over. I know some people are maybe down on Will Richardson, but I think this is huge. A, for Oregon, huge. B, for the league. He's going to be one of the better players in the conference. And, we don't know how long he was dealing with mono during his true senior season. So it gives him an opportunity to do it over again. And, I mean, again, maybe I'm a little optimistic here, but I just think this is a team that should make the NCAA tournament. And it wouldn't surprise me if they're a Sweet 16 caliber team. But at minimum, they need to be an NCAA tournament team at minimum.
Yeah, at minimum, for sure. I think it was important to add Keyshawn Bartholomew as well and put him as a primary point guard, have Will Richardson as the 2. I just think that's where he's best. That didn't really happen last year with Davion Harmon and Jacob Young because those guys were both better suited to be a number 2. Will Richardson, I just don't think has the skill set to be a number 1. I think he's just better off as an off-ball guard, and that's fine. That's why he worked so well with Peyton Pritchard, because Peyton Pritchard was the true point guard of that group. I think the addition of Richardson obviously makes his team much better, gives him a true number 1, a guy who's been through it all, someone who can make clutch shots, et cetera, et cetera. And now they have a lot of tall guards that Dana Altman loves to work around with, and Kuznard, Bartholomew, Richardson, Tyrone Williams. Soares, if you want to count him as a guard. They have options now, and their front court depth isn't the best, but this is where Quincy Guerrier can play that small ball 5. Depending on his matchup, you maybe don't want him to be a center out there, but he's 6'8", 6'9", can hold his own, can stretch the floor. He was really pivotal down the stretch last season to try to at least get them to potentially make a tournament bid. Came up short, but he's still he's a solid player, and to have him back, I think is going to help. Probably not as much as Richardson, but I think a lot of the underlying defensive metrics, the defensive statistics, the defensive ability is going to be because Quincy Guerrier is back.
I mean, Jared, go back to the second game you and I covered that year was against SMU, a team that they very clearly could have been a tournament team at the end of the season. And Oregon just throttled them 86-63. And for whatever reason, Oregon, the first 2 games of the season looked like they were supposed to be. And looked like a second week of the NCAA tournament type team. And then it never really clicked after that. But that was a game where Will Richardson played kind of off the ball, like Jared brought up. He only played 20 minutes. He scored 18 points. He was 4 of 5 on threes.
Right.
And that was because Harmon and Young were doing a lot of the point guard distributions that game. Eric Williams had a team high 3 assists, which was a game in which he played, really good early on for Oregon, and he kind of fell off at the end of the year. I just think Oregon, they're set up to kind of be the team they were supposed to be last year. They don't have as many big guys as Jared pointed out, but I think last year they had a lot of big guys and they felt like they maybe had to play them, and they never really.
I think this is okay that they don't have as many.
Yeah, they don't like that. The guys last year didn't all necessarily fit well. Like you had 2 of the same thing. Like Isaac and Bill were the same player. Frank and Dante were the same player. And it felt like they had to play all of them or 3 of them every game, where now you've got Dante back, you've got Biddle back, and who are totally different players between the 2 of them. And then you've got kind of a mix of the 2 in Ware, who can shoot threes but also has a good post-up game. And so now you've only got 3 big guys to really worry about for one, maybe two spots. Throw in Quincy for your fourth big man. And now you've got that natural kind of rotation of guys. I just think this roster is built better than it was last year. And that could be a reason why I feel like the expectations should remain high. All right, it's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Thank you for listening to the show. Thank you for submitting questions. Until the next one, we'll be back later this week. You've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.